Hello, welcome back to Board Game Bananas. Here are the bananas, and today the board game is Quest for El Dorado. Today we're being brave explorers hunting the mystical land of El Dorado, where treasure and gold beyond our wildest dreams awaits. There's a lot to unpack today, so let's get straight in to how to play. So, I've got the board set up in the way that the rules recommend for when you're playing for the very first time. When you're comfortable in the game, by the way, you can set up the board however you like. What you're trying to do is move the figure in your colour past all the different types of terrain along the board into the El Dorado spaces at the end. And the first player to get there is the winner. I really like a game that has such a simple premise. What you're trying to do here is move from one end of the board to the other. Fastest wins. Simple. Each player starts the game with 8 cards in their hand. 4 travellers, 3 explorers and 1 sailor. You'll notice that the board is primarily made of 3 types of terrain. You've got your green hexagons with a machete in them. You've got your yellow gold hexagons with the circle in them. And you've got your blue hexagons with the paddle. What you would do is, in order to move into a green hexagon with a machete, you would play an explorer card. In order to move into the blue paddle, you would play a sailor. And of course, in order to move into the gold hexagon with the circle, that's right, you would play a traveller. An important thing to note here is that later on, as you get further and further up the board, there are more and more of these hexagons that have, for example, 2 machetes in them, or multiple circles, or even there's a couple with multiple paddles. In order to do that, if I was here, for example, and I was trying to get into that square, that hexagon I should say, of course there's 2 machetes in it, which would mean, in this case, I would have to play 2 explorers. The other thing you might want to do when it's your turn, instead of moving your piece further along the board, is you may want to buy some better cards. I'll get into how that works in just a second, but firstly, the reason why you might want to do that, I said that if I wanted to move this guy onto here, because there's 2 machetes, that would take 2 explorers. The reason for that is because the explorers have a number 1 in the top corner. If I, for example, had a scout in my hand, if I bought him at the shop previously, the scout has 2 machetes in the top corner, which would mean I can simply play a scout and then move on to a hexagon with 2 machetes. If I had an even better card, if I had a trailblazer that has 3 machete in the top, then I'd be able to move the 2 there and then an extra 1 like that. So that's why you might want to buy some better cards. So how do you actually go about buying better cards? Well, the price of these cards is the number in the gold coin in the middle bottom of each of these cards here, and the money that you have is determined by which cards you have in your hand. If you have one of these gold cards, then basically the number in the coin is worth 1 for 1. So 1 traveller card would be able to get you something for the value of 1, for example, a scout. The explorers and the sailors, or I should say the machete cards and the paddle cards, are worth a little bit less. Basically, you take the number on the card and you halve it. So in order to buy a trailblazer, we can see that that has a price of 3. So one way of doing that would be if I had three traveller cards in my hand, because the 1 is worth 1, which means 1, 2, 3. But also I could buy it if I only had 2 travellers in my hand, but I also had 1 sailor and 1 explorer. You add them together, that's 2, you halve it is 1, and then 2 and 3. And that would then buy me a trailblazer card. An important thing to note about the shop is that you're only allowed to buy the cards that are on the bottom row, one of these 6 cards. There are 3 of each type, but let's say that the Trailblazers have been sold out. Then there's an available spot at the bottom, which would basically mean that the next person who goes to the shop would be able to buy one of these 12 cards. Let's say that they choose to buy a journalist, then they get the journalist card. The remaining 2 journalists go down there, and then the next player can choose again one of these 6, and they can't possibly buy one of these. That's a very important point to make there. And that's one of the biggest strategic decisions you have to make as the game goes on. Do you want to use your cards to move and get ahead of your opponent, or do you want to use your cards to invest in buying better cards so that you can hopefully use them later on during the game? Now let's have a look at how the gameplay actually works. So, it's my turn. Let's say I'm playing as blue. The figure that starts on the number 1 position is the player that goes first. So what I do is I start by drawing the top 4 cards from my deck. I've got an Explorer, a Traveller, another Explorer, and I have a Sailor. So again, I can either use these to move my figure along, or I can use it to invest in some better cards. What I'm going to do, I'm going to play my Explorer, put it on my discard pile, and then I'm going to move that 1 space inwards. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to invest in some better cards. So this is worth 1 in the shop. These 2 are worth half of the number in the half of the number on the card each. So those 2 together are worth 1 more, which means I can buy something for the price of 2. In this case, I'm going to go to the shop and I'm going to buy a Jack of all trades cards. Jack of all trades, as you can see, costs 2. And I can actually use it either for a green machete, a blue paddle, or a gold coin. And that's a very useful card to have. What then happens, because I just bought this card, basically I put it on my own discard pile. And then next turn, I would start by picking up cards again. Then eventually, when all of these cards have run out, we reshuffle them. And then I start by picking up 4 again, and then eventually I'll get my new Jack of all trades card. But I hear you say there are other types of terrain on the board as well. What's the deal with those? Well, there are these black hexagons. Those are mountain areas where you're not allowed to go. It's not possible to move onto a black mountain square. Then there are these grey ones with the white card on it. Basically, you can play any card you like to move on to one of these. It doesn't have to be a matching machete, gold or paddle symbol. Play any card you like, you can move on to one of those hexagons. Finally, there are the red sort of barnyard cards. Again, you can play any card you like to move on to one of them, but any card you play to move on to there gets completely eliminated from the game. Most cards, you play them, they end up in your own discard pile, you then shuffle them and can use them again in the future. Any card that goes onto there, any card that you play to move on to there, eliminated from the game, you can't play it again. That is also a valid point to make about some of the cards that you might buy. Some of them have got a little square under the number with a red X going through it. That basically means you can play the card once and only once, and then instead of it going in your discard pile, it is then taken out of the game completely. Lastly, between the pieces of the board, there are these zigzaggy tiles. Basically, with them, the first player that goes across it gets to remove this from the board, and they get to keep that piece. So for everybody else, it actually becomes slightly easier to jump over because there's one less piece for them to jump. But the reason why you might want to do that, if you're the first player to pick it up, is basically when the first player reaches El Dorado, We then finish off the turn, and if another player also reaches El Dorado within the same turn, then whoever has the most of these zigzaggy pieces is the winner. So they're very useful in a tie-break situation. They're how you determine who it is that has actually won. And one more minor rule, you can't have two players occupying the same space on the board. So that can basically lead to people intentionally or unintentionally blocking each other. By the way, if you're playing a two-player game, you would actually have two pieces of your own colour. Even then, you're not allowed to have both of your pieces on the same hexagon as each other. And there we have it. It's a simple enough game. You're trying to get from one end of the board to the other. Fastest wins. And along the way, you always have that decision to make, do I want to block my opponent? And do I want to play my cards so that I can move further along the board? Or do I want to invest my cards into buying some better cards that I can use in the future? It's a very great game. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions about it. Please write me a comment down below. If you'd like to know my thoughts and opinions in a bit more depth, I do have a review video coming very, very shortly, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that one. But spoilers, it's a really good game. But yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts. Enjoy the game and good luck. Take care.